The rope burned through frozen leather as Sienna Emerson felt herself jerked backward off her feet, her scream swallowed by the howling Montana wind. Her stepbrother Marcus had finally made good on his threats, and now she was being dragged behind his horse through knee-deep snow, the world becoming a blur of white agony and bitter cold that stole the breath from her lungs. The year was 1883, and in the wild stretches between settlements, a woman's life could end as quickly as a match flame in a blizzard, and nobody would ever know the truth of how she died. Sienna had been gathering firewood near the line shack when Marcus found her. Their parents had married just 2 years prior, her widowed mother desperate for security, his father wanting a woman to keep house after his first wife succumbed to pneumonia. The arrangement had seemed practical enough until Marcus started looking at Sienna with eyes that made her skin crawl, making demands she refused to meet. Today, when she had threatened to tell his father about his advances, something in him had snapped. The rope was tied around her wrists, the other end secured to his saddle. He had mounted his bay gelding with a look of cold fury and kicked the animal into motion before she could even beg for mercy. Now the snow tore at her face like 1,000 tiny knives, her heavy woolen skirt twisting around her legs as she tumbled and slid behind the galloping horse. She could taste blood in her mouth, feel it warming her split lip even as the rest of her body grew numb with cold. Through the white chaos, she glimpsed dark pines rushing past, heard Marcus laughing over the thunder of hooves. The world tilted and spun, pain radiating through her shoulders as the rope yanked her arms nearly from their sockets. She tried to scream again but had no air left, her lungs burning from the effort of trying to breathe while being dragged like a sack of grain across the frozen ground. Then suddenly the pressure released. The rope went slack, and Sienna tumbled to a stop in a snowbank, gasping and choking, unable to comprehend what had happened. Her vision swam with black spots, her ears ringing. Somewhere ahead she heard Marcus cursing, heard his horse whinnying in alarm. "You son of a bitch!" The voice was low and dangerous, carried on the wind with absolute authority. "Get off that horse right now." Sienna managed to roll onto her side, blinking snow from her lashes. Through the blur, she saw a tall figure on a black and white paint horse blocking the trail ahead. The man sat easy in his saddle despite the bitter cold, a rifle across his lap, his face shadowed by the brim of a dark hat. Even from a distance, she could see the tension in his posture, coiled and ready. Marcus wheeled his horse around, and Sienna saw the severed rope trailing from his saddle. The stranger must have cut it somehow, impossibly fast. "This is none of your concern, mister," Marcus snarled. "That is my sister, and I am bringing her home for discipline. She stole from my father." "Liar!" The word cracked like a whip through the frozen air. The stranger urged his paint forward a few paces, and now Sienna could see him more clearly. He was perhaps 25 or 26, with a strong jaw darkened by several days of stubble, and ice-blue eyes that burned with barely contained rage. "I saw what you did. Saw you tie her up and drag her. That is not discipline. That is murder. I told you, this is family business." Marcus reached for the revolver at his hip, but the stranger already had his rifle aimed dead center at Marcus's chest. The speed with which he had moved was startling. "Touch that gun and you are a dead man," the stranger said quietly. "Now get down off that horse." For a long moment nobody moved. The wind howled through the pines, sending snow swirling in ghostly eddies across the trail. Sienna tried to push herself upright, but her arms would not cooperate, the rope still binding her wrists, her muscles screaming in protest. She managed to get to her knees, swaying, tasting blood and snow. Marcus must have seen something in the stranger's eyes that convinced him. With great reluctance he dismounted, his hand still hovering near his weapon. "You are making a mistake." "The only mistake was yours." The stranger swung down from his paint in one fluid motion, keeping his rifle trained on Marcus even as he moved. He was tall, well over 6 feet, wearing a heavy sheepskin coat that made his shoulders look impossibly broad. "You hurt her bad?" "I am fine," Sienna tried to say, but it came out as a rasping whisper. The stranger's jaw tightened. Without taking his eyes off Marcus, he called over his shoulder, "Can you stand, miss?" Sienna tried. She got one foot under her, then the other. But when she attempted to rise, her legs buckled. She collapsed back into the snow with a cry of frustration. Everything hurt. A deep, bone-aching cold combined with the burning pain of rope burns, and what she suspected were cracked ribs. "Stay down then, Mariner," the stranger said. "This will be finished shortly." To Marcus he said, "Start walking." "Walking where? We are miles from anywhere." "Exactly. Start walking back the way you came. And if I see you turn around, if I see you so much as look back, I will put a bullet in you. Consider yourself lucky I do not do it anyway." Marcus's face flushed red with rage. "That horse is mine. My gear is on that saddle." "Not anymore. You lost your horse privileges when you decided to drag a woman through the snow behind it. Now walk before I change my mind about letting you live." For a moment, Sienna thought Marcus might actually draw on the stranger despite the rifle aimed at his heart. His hand twitched toward his gun, his face contorting with fury, but something in the stranger's eyes must have warned him, because instead Marcus spat in the snow and turned away, trudging back along the trail they had come from. Within moments, the swirling snow had reduced him to a dark shadow, then swallowed him entirely. Only then did the stranger lower his rifle and turn to Sienna. His expression transformed from cold fury to concern in an instant. He knelt beside her in the snow, leaning his rifle against a nearby pine. "Let me see your hands." His voice was gentler now, but still carried that undercurrent of steel. Up close, Sienna could see his face clearly for the first time. He had strong, almost severe features with a straight nose and high cheekbones reddened by cold. A scar cut through his left eyebrow, giving him a dangerous appearance that was offset by the genuine worry in those striking blue eyes. "I need to get this rope off," he said, pulling a knife from his belt. "Hold still." Sienna tried to comply but could not stop shaking. The adrenaline that had sustained her through the ordeal was fading, leaving her trembling and weak. She watched through half-closed eyes as the stranger worked the knife carefully between the rope coils, sawing through the frozen hemp. His hands were large and calloused, but surprisingly gentle as he supported her wrists. When the rope finally fell away, he drew in a sharp breath. The hemp had cut deep, abrading away skin and leaving raw, bleeding wounds that were already starting to swell. "Christ," he muttered. "This is bad. Can you move your fingers?" Sienna tried. Her fingers twitched, but pain shot up her arms like lightning. She whimpered before she could stop herself. All right, all right." The stranger shrugged off his sheepskin coat and wrapped it around her shoulders. The garment was still warm from his body and smelled of leather, wood smoke, and horse. "My name is Isaac Young. I have got a camp about a mile from here with a fire and supplies. Can you ride if I help you into the saddle?" "I think so," Sienna whispered. Then, because it seemed important, "My name is Sienna Emerson." "Pleased to meet you, Miss Emerson, though I wish it were under better circumstances." Isaac stood and whistled sharply. Both horses, his paint and Marcus's bay, trotted over obediently. He had clearly been working with horses his whole life. He caught the bay's reins and began stripping the saddle and gear from its back. This animal did nothing wrong. I will not leave it to freeze just because its owner was a bastard. Despite her pain, Sienna found herself appreciating his consideration for the horse. She watched as Isaac worked quickly and efficiently, removing the saddle and bridle and replacing them with a simple rope halter he pulled from his own saddlebag. The bay immediately seemed calmer, shaking its head as if relieved to be free of the tight bit. "Now let's get you up," Isaac said, turning back to Sienna. He crouched down and before she could protest, lifted her as easily as if she weighed nothing at all. She gasped at the sudden movement, clutching at his shoulders. Through his wool shirt, she could feel the solid muscle underneath, the warmth of him cutting through her cold. "Easy," he murmured, carrying her to his paint. "I have got you. You are safe now." Safe. The word seemed foreign. Sienna had not felt safe since her mother married Marcus's father, moving them from their small farm near Boise, Idaho, to this harsh Montana wilderness. She had not felt safe in months, watching Marcus's obsession with her grow darker and more dangerous. And now this stranger, this Isaac Young, was promising safety as if he could simply make it so through sheer force of will. He settled her into his side saddle, keeping one hand on her waist to steady her until she found her balance. The paint stood perfectly still, as if sensing the need for care. Isaac gathered the reins of both horses and swung up behind Sienna, pulling her back against his chest. "Hold on to the saddle horn," he instructed. "I will keep you from falling." Sienna gripped the horn with her damaged hands, biting back a cry of pain. Isaac's arm came around her waist, solid and secure, and then they were moving. The paint walked carefully through the deep snow, the bay following on a lead rope behind them. Isaac kept the pace slow and steady, his body sheltering Sienna from the worst of the wind. "What were you doing out here?" Sienna asked after a few minutes, needing to focus on something other than the pain radiating through her entire body. "Hunting," Isaac replied. His breath was warm against her ear. "I work as a scout and hunter for the railroad crews when they're laying track, but the work shut down for winter. Been staying in an old trapper's cabin about 5 miles north of here, living off the land until spring." "You are alone out here?" "Most of the time. I prefer it that way." There was something in his tone that suggested a story, some old hurt or loss, but Sienna did not press. "What about you? What made your stepbrother decide to drag you through the snow today?" Sienna hesitated. Shame burned in her throat, even though she knew she had done nothing wrong. "He wanted things from me that I would not give. I threatened to tell his father. He got angry." The arm around her waist tightened slightly. "What kind of things?" She could not say it out loud, could not voice the disgusting propositions Marcus had made, the way he cornered her in the barn or watched her through her bedroom window. Instead, she just shook her head. Isaac was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice was cold as the winter air. "I understand. I am sorry I let him walk away." "You saved my life," Sienna said quietly. "If you had not cut that rope—" She could not finish the sentence, did not want to imagine how much farther Marcus would have dragged her before the cold or the rope killed her. Anyone decent would have done the same. "Maybe, but you were the one who was there. You were the one who acted." She paused, then added, "Thank you." "You are welcome, Miss Emerson." They rode in silence after that, the only sounds the crunch of snow under hooves and the wind whistling through the pines. Sienna found herself growing drowsy despite the pain, lulled by the rhythm of the horse's gait and the warmth of Isaac's body behind her. She tried to fight it, knowing sleep in these conditions could be dangerous, but exhaustion was winning. "Stay awake," Isaac said, jostling her slightly. "We are almost there. You can rest by the fire, but not yet. Stay with me, Sienna." The use of her given name sent an unexpected flutter through her chest. She forced her eyes open, blinking away snow. "I am awake." "Good. Tell me about Boise. You said you came from there?" "My mother and I lived on a farm outside town," Sienna said, forcing the words out to stay alert. "Small place, just a few acres. My father died when I was 16, kicked by a horse. We tried to keep the farm going, but it was too much. Then Marcus's father came through selling seed, and my mother—" She trailed off. "Saw an opportunity," Isaac finished gently. "I do not blame her. We would have lost everything. And James, Marcus's father, he seemed kind. He is kind mostly, just blind to what his son really is. Or maybe he does not want to see." That was probably the truth of it. James Thornton had built a successful ranch through hard work and determination. He had no tolerance for weakness or complaint. When Sienna had tried once to hint at Marcus's behavior, James had brushed it off as sibling squabbling. told her to work it out amongst themselves. He could not imagine his own son capable of such darkness. "There," Isaac said, pointing ahead with his free hand. "See the smoke?" Sienna squinted through the snow and spotted a thin column of smoke rising above the trees. A few moments later, a small log cabin came into view, nestled in a clearing with a lean-to stable behind it. It was a rough structure, clearly built for function rather than comfort, but smoke drifting from its stone chimney promised warmth. Isaac guided the paint up to the cabin door and dismounted, then reached up to help Sienna down. Her legs nearly gave out when her feet touched the ground, but Isaac caught her easily, one arm behind her back, the other under her knees, as he lifted her again. "I can walk," she protested weakly. "Maybe, but why risk it?" He kicked the cabin door open and carried her inside. The interior was dimly lit by the glow from a stone fireplace, but blessedly warm. Sienna could see a single room with rough-hewn furniture, a narrow bed in one corner, a table and chairs, shelves holding supplies. Animal furs hung on the walls for insulation, and a rifle rack held 2 more weapons beside the door. It was a bachelor's dwelling, sparse and practical, but clean and well-maintained. Isaac carried her to the bed and set her down carefully on the thick quilts. "Stay here. I need to tend the horses, then I will see to your injuries." He was gone before she could respond, the door closing behind him and bringing a brief gust of cold air. Sienna lay back against the pillows, suddenly aware of how much pain she was in now that the cold had stopped numbing her. Her wrists throbbed, her ribs ached with every breath, and her legs and back felt like they had been beaten with clubs. She suspected she looked as bad as she felt, covered in bruises and rope burns and half frozen. Isaac returned perhaps 10 minutes later, stamping snow from his boots. He had put both horses in the lean-to with hay and water, moving with the casual efficiency of someone who had done these tasks thousands of times. Now he shrugged out of his heavy coat and hung it by the door, then crossed to the fireplace to add more wood to the flames. "Let me heat some water," he said, not looking at her. "Then we will clean those wounds and see what else needs tending." Sienna watched him work, filling a large pot from a barrel of water in the corner and hanging it on a hook above the fire. He moved around the small cabin with unconscious grace, clearly comfortable in this space. When he finally turned back to her, his expression was carefully neutral, but she could see the tension in his shoulders. "I am going to need to see your injuries," he said quietly. "Your wrists I already know about, but you were dragged a fair distance, may have broken bones or worse." Heat flooded Sienna's face despite the cold that still clung to her. The impropriety of the situation suddenly struck her. She was alone in a cabin with a strange man about to let him examine her body. But what choice did she have? If she was seriously injured, she might die without treatment, and the nearest doctor was probably 30 miles away in weather too brutal to attempt the journey. "All right," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Isaac nodded and pulled a chair over beside the bed. He sat down and reached for her hands first, examining the rope burns by the firelight. His touch was gentle but thorough, turning her wrist to see the extent of the damage. Sienna hissed in pain but held still. "These need to be cleaned and bandaged," he said. "Going to hurt worse before it feels better, I'm afraid." "I can bear it." He met her eyes then, and something in his gaze made her breath catch. There was admiration there, and anger on her behalf, and something else she could not quite name. "I believe you can," he said softly. Then he rose and went to retrieve the pot of water, now steaming, and a clean cloth from a shelf. The next hour was an exercise in endurance. Isaac cleaned her wrists with meticulous care, using water that felt scalding against her raw skin. Sienna bit her lip hard enough to draw fresh blood, determined not to cry out. When the wounds were clean, he applied a salve that smelled of pine and herbs, then wrapped them carefully in strips of clean linen. "Now your other injuries," he said. "Can you tell me where else you are hurt?" "My ribs," Sienna admitted. "Left side mostly, and my back and legs, but I think that is just bruising." Isaac hesitated, then said, "I need to check your ribs to see if any are broken. Would require me to—" He gestured vaguely at her bodice. I understand. Sienna's fingers fumbled with the buttons of her dress, but the bandages in her trembling hands made it impossible. After a moment, Isaac gently pushed her hands aside. Let me. His fingers were deft and impersonal as he worked the buttons free, parting the heavy fabric of her dress enough to reveal the simple cotton chemise underneath. Even through the thin fabric, Sienna could see the dark purple bruises blooming across her left side. Isaac's jaw tightened. Without a word, he began to carefully palpate her ribs, his fingers pressing gently but firmly. Sienna gasped when he found a particularly tender spot. Sorry, he muttered. Does this hurt? He pressed again, slightly lower. Yes. He continued his examination with professional detachment, though Sienna could see the muscle jumping in his jaw. Finally, he sat back. I think you have 2 cracked ribs, maybe 3. Nothing I can do for that except bind them and have you rest. The bruising is bad, but nothing that will not heal. He paused. You are lucky, could have been so much worse. I know. Sienna's voice cracked on the words. The full weight of what had almost happened was finally sinking in. Marcus had tried to kill her. Her own stepbrother had meant to drag her until she died, then probably claim it was an accident, that she had fallen and gotten tangled in a rope. And if Isaac had not been there, if he had not seen and acted. A sob escaped her throat before she could stop it. Then another. Suddenly she was crying in earnest, great heaving sobs that made her cracked ribs scream in protest, but she could not stop. All the fear and pain and shock of the day came pouring out of her in a flood. Easy, easy. Isaac's hands were on her shoulders, steadying her. Then, as if it were the most natural thing in the world, he pulled her carefully against his chest, letting her cry into his shirt. One hand came up to cradle the back of her head, his fingers tangling in her snow-damp hair. You are safe now. I promise you are safe. Sienna clung to him and wept, her bandaged hands fisting in the fabric of his shirt. She cried for everything she had lost, for the home she had left behind in Boise, for her father and the life that had died with him. She cried for her mother, who had been forced to make impossible choices, and for herself, trapped in a situation she had no power to escape. She cried until there were no tears left, until she was hollow and exhausted and strangely lighter. Through it all, Isaac held her, not speaking, just offering his steady presence. When her sobs finally subsided to hiccups, he reached for a clean cloth and gently wiped her face. Better? He asked quietly. Sienna nodded, not trusting her voice. She was suddenly acutely aware of how close they were, of the warmth of his body and the steady beat of his heart under her ear. She should pull away, should put proper distance between them, but she could not make herself move. Let me finish binding those ribs, Isaac said, but he did not release her immediately. For a moment they stayed frozen like that. Sienna cradled against his chest, his hand still tangled in her hair. Then he cleared his throat and carefully eased her back onto the pillows. He worked quickly after that, wrapping strips of cloth around her ribcage to immobilize the cracked bones. Sienna focused on breathing shallowly, trying not to think about the intimacy of his hands on her body. When he was finished, he helped her button her dress again, his eyes carefully averted. You should rest now, he said, pulling the quilts up over her. Sleep will help you heal. Where will you sleep? Sienna asked, suddenly aware that there was only one bed. I have got a bedroll. I will sleep by the fire. Will not be the first time. He stood and moved away, putting distance between them. Are you hungry? I have got venison stew from last night. I could warm it up. Sienna's stomach twisted at the mention of food, but she knew she should eat. Thank you. That would be good. She watched through half-closed eyes as Isaac busied himself at the fireplace, heating the stew in an iron pot. The domestic scene felt surreal after the violence of the day. This man who had faced down Marcus with a rifle, who had threatened to shoot him without hesitation, was now carefully spooning stew into wooden bowls as if they were old friends sharing a meal. When the food was ready, Isaac helped Sienna sit up enough to eat, propping her with pillows. The stew was rich and savory, seasoned with wild herbs, and despite her nausea, Sienna found herself eating ravenously. She had not realized how hungry she was until food was in front of her. They ate in companionable silence, the only sounds the crackling of the fire and the wind howling outside. Night had fallen while Isaac tended her wounds, and now the darkness pressed against the cabin's single window. Sienna tried not to think about Marcus out there in the blizzard, tried not to feel guilty. He had chosen his actions, and whatever happened to him now was his own fault. "What will you do?" Isaac asked, reading her thoughts with uncanny accuracy. "When you are healed, I mean. Will you go back to your mother?" Sienna had been trying not to think about that. "I do not know. If I go back, Marcus will try again, or worse. But if I do not, my mother will think I abandoned her." "Could write her a letter, explain what happened." "Would she believe me?" Sienna set her empty bowl aside. "She wants to believe James's family is good, wants to believe she made the right choice in marrying him. I am not sure she could accept the truth about Marcus." Isaac was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. When he spoke, his voice was thoughtful. "I have got some money saved. Not a lot, but enough to get you to Boise if that's where you want to go. Could probably find work there, make your own way. Or—" He hesitated, then met her eyes. "You could stay here until spring. Help me with the hunting and trapping. Split the profits when we sell the furs, would give you time to heal and decide what you want to do." Sienna's heart leaped at the offer, even as her practical mind pointed out the impropriety. A young unmarried woman living alone with a bachelor in the wilderness? It was scandalous. If anyone found out, her reputation would be ruined. Not that it mattered much out here. Still, there was Isaac's reputation to consider. "People would talk," she said quietly. "I do not care what people say." Isaac's voice was firm. "And there are not exactly a lot of people around here to do the talking anyway. Nearest neighbor is 10 miles south, and I doubt we will see them until the snow melts." He paused. "Look, I am not going to force you into anything. If you want to leave as soon as you are well enough to travel, I will take you wherever you want to go, but the offer stands if you want it. No strings attached, just two people helping each other survive the winter." No strings attached. Sienna wanted to believe him, but she had learned the hard way that men always wanted something. Marcus had started with friendly attention too before his intentions became clear. Still, something in Isaac's steady gaze convinced her he was different. He had already had ample opportunity to take advantage of her vulnerability and had not. He had shown her nothing but respect and care. "I would like to stay," she heard herself say. "Until spring, at least. If you are certain it would not be an imposition." "No imposition." Isaac's stern face softened slightly, the corners of his eyes crinkling in what might have been the beginning of a smile. "To be honest, I would welcome the company. Gets lonely out here talking to nothing but horses and pine trees." "Then I accept your offer, thank you, Isaac." "You are welcome, Sienna." The sound of her name in his deep voice sent another flutter through her chest, but Sienna was too exhausted to examine the feeling. Her eyes were growing heavy, the warmth of the fire and the food in her belly making it impossible to stay awake any longer. "Sleep," Isaac said, rising to take her bowl. "We can sort everything else out in the morning." Sienna did not argue. She let herself sink into the soft quilts, which smelled of pine and wood smoke like everything else in the cabin. The last thing she saw before sleep claimed her was Isaac spreading his bedroll by the fire, the flickering light casting shadows across his strong profile. She was safe. For the first time in months, perhaps years, she was truly safe. The days that followed fell into a rhythm. Sienna spent most of her time healing, lying in bed or sitting by the fire while Isaac went about his work. He checked his trap lines every morning, returning with rabbits or the occasional fox. In the afternoons, he would prepare the pelts, scraping and stretching them with practiced skill while Sienna watched and learned. At first she could do little but rest, her body still aching and weak. But as the days passed and her injuries began to heal, she started helping with small tasks. She mended Isaac's worn shirts with careful stitches, cooked meals from his stores of dried beans and venison, kept the fire going throughout the day. It felt good to be useful again, to contribute rather than just being a burden. They talked while they worked, slowly learning each other's stories. Isaac had grown up in Wyoming Territory, the youngest of 3 brothers. His parents had run a small ranch until rustlers killed his father and older brother when Isaac was 18. His surviving brother had sold the ranch and moved east, but Isaac had stayed, working as a scout for the army and later for railroad crews. "Why did you stay?" Sienna asked one evening as they shared a dinner of roasted rabbit and wild onions. "Why not go east with your brother?" Isaac shrugged. "This is my home. The mountains, the plains, the wilderness. I do not know how to be anything other than what I am. City life would suffocate me." Sienna understood that feeling. Even before her father died, she had loved the wild places. She had spent her childhood exploring the foothills around Boise, learning the names of plants and animals, feeling more at peace among the trees than in town. It was one of the things she had mourned most about the move to the Thornton Ranch, which kept her confined to domestic duties with little freedom to roam. "What about you?" Isaac asked, echoing her earlier question. "What did you want to do before your father died, before everything changed?" No one had asked her that in so long that Sienna had to think about it. "I wanted to be a teacher," she said finally. "There was a schoolhouse in Boise that needed help, and the teacher said I had a gift for it, but after my father died there was no money for more schooling. Then we moved and—" She trailed off, the unfinished dreams hanging in the air between them. "Still could," Isaac said quietly, "after winter. If you wanted to go back to Boise, I could help you get settled, make sure you were safe while you found work." The offer touched her more than she could express. Here was this man who barely knew her, offering to upend his life to help her achieve her dreams. It was the kind of selfless generosity she had thought did not exist anymore. "Why are you being so kind to me?" The question escaped before she could stop it. Isaac met her eyes across the small table. In the firelight, his face was all plains and shadows, that scar through his eyebrow giving him a roguish appearance at odds with his gentle nature. "Because you deserve kindness," he said simply. "Because no one should have to suffer what you did. And because—" He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "Because from the moment I saw you lying in that snow, something in me just knew I had to protect you. Cannot explain it better than that." Heat flooded Sienna's cheeks. She looked down at her plate, her heart hammering. In the weeks since that terrible day, she had become increasingly aware of Isaac in ways that had nothing to do with gratitude. She noticed the way his hands moved with such confidence and skill. She noticed the rare smiles that transformed his severe face. She noticed the breadth of his shoulders and the way his eyes crinkled when he was amused. She noticed, and she felt guilty for noticing. He had saved her life and offered her shelter with no expectations. The last thing she should be doing was developing romantic feelings for him. It was inappropriate and unfair, putting him in an impossible position if he did not return her regard. But when she finally dared to look up again, she found Isaac watching her with an intensity that stole her breath. For a long moment, neither of them moved, the air between them suddenly charged with something unspoken. Then Isaac cleared his throat and looked away, breaking the spell. "Getting late," he said, his voice rougher than usual. "Should get some rest." They prepared for bed in careful silence, moving around each other with exaggerated politeness. Isaac banked the fire while Sienna changed into the spare shirt he had given her to sleep in, its hem falling past her knees. When she was safely under the quilts, he spread his bedroll by the hearth as he did every night. "Isaac?" Sienna said into the darkness. "Yes? Thank you. For everything." "You have already thanked me 100 times. I know, but I mean it. Every time." She heard him shift in his bedroll, imagined him lying there staring at the ceiling. "You are welcome," he said softly. Every time. Now sleep. Sienna closed her eyes and tried to obey, but sleep was elusive. She lay awake listening to the wind and the crackle of the dying fire, wondering what would happen when spring came. Would she really go back to Boise alone? Would Isaac return to his wandering life, hiring on with railroad crews and living out of camps? The thought of parting from him felt wrong somehow, like leaving a piece of herself behind. But she was getting ahead of herself. Winter was far from over. They had months yet before the snow would melt enough to travel. Months together in this small cabin, just the two of them against the cold. Anything could happen in that time. As December gave way to January, the relationship between Sienna and Isaac deepened in ways neither of them explicitly acknowledged. They worked side by side, their movements falling into harmony. Isaac taught Sienna how to set snares and read animal tracks in the snow. She taught him card games her father had shown her, and they spent long evenings playing for matches while the wind howled outside. Sometimes their hands would brush when passing tools or dishes, and the contact would linger a moment too long. Sometimes Sienna would look up to find Isaac watching her with that same intense expression, only to have him quickly glance away. Sometimes she would catch herself staring at him, memorizing the angles of his face, and have to force her attention elsewhere. The tension built slowly, a sweet ache that grew stronger with each passing day. They were always careful to maintain propriety, always respectful of boundaries, but Sienna could feel something shifting between them. The air seemed to crackle when they were close, heavy with possibility. It came to a head on a particularly brutal night in late January. A blizzard had been raging for 3 days, keeping Isaac confined to the cabin. He was restless from lack of activity, pacing like a caged wolf, and Sienna could feel his agitation mounting. "You should sit down before you wear a path in the floor," she said, looking up from the sock she was darning. Isaac ran a hand through his hair, making it stand up in dark spikes. "I am going stir crazy. I am not good at being cooped up." "I noticed." Sienna set her mending aside. "Come play cards with me. It will give you something to focus on besides the walls." He hesitated, then nodded and dropped into the chair across from her. Sienna shuffled the worn deck and dealt out hands for poker, another game her father had taught her. They played in tense silence for a while, the only sounds the snap of cards and the roar of the wind. "What are you thinking about?" Sienna asked after she won the third hand in a row. Isaac was usually a better player than this, but tonight he seemed utterly distracted. "Nothing. Everything." He tossed his cards down with more force than necessary. "Do you ever wonder what your life would have been like if different choices had been made? If your father had not died? If my father had sold the ranch before the rustlers came? If any of 1,000 small moments had gone differently?" "All the time," Sienna admitted, "but I try not to dwell on it. Cannot change the past." "No, but sometimes the past feels like it is choking you, like you will never be free of it." Isaac's voice was raw, more emotion in it than she had heard since that first day. "I am sorry. I should not burden you with my dark moods." "You have carried my burdens," Sienna said gently. "Let me carry some of yours." When he did not respond, she added, "Talk to me, Isaac, please." He was quiet for so long she thought he would refuse. Then, haltingly, he began to speak. "When my father and brother were killed, I was not there. I was in town, drinking in a saloon because I was young and stupid and thought I was invincible. If I had been home, if I had been where I should have been, maybe I could have stopped it. Maybe they would still be alive." "Or maybe you would be dead too," Sienna said softly. "You cannot know." "That is what my surviving brother said. He told me I was a fool for blaming myself. But how can I not? I was supposed to be there. I was supposed to help protect the ranch." Sienna reached across the table and took his hand, the first time she had initiated such contact. His fingers were warm and rough, calloused from hard work. "You were 18. You were not responsible for what those rustlers chose to do. The guilt you carry belongs to them, not you. Isaac's hand tightened around hers. I know that in my head, but in my heart. He shook his head. I have spent the last 8 years trying to outrun that night, staying busy, taking dangerous jobs, never settling anywhere long enough to put down roots. Thought if I just kept moving, the memories would not catch up. Did it work? No. The word was barely a whisper. It never works. I am still right here, still that kid who failed when it mattered most. You did not fail me. Sienna squeezed his hand. When it mattered most, you were exactly where you needed to be. You saved my life, Isaac. That has to count for something. He looked up at her then, and the vulnerability in his eyes made her heart ache. It does, he said hoarsely. You have no idea how much it does. For the first time in years, I feel like maybe I am worth something. Like maybe all the darkness was leading to that one moment when I could do something good. You are worth something, Sienna said fiercely. You are worth everything. The words hung between them, charged with more meaning than she had intended. Isaac's eyes darkened, his gaze dropping to her lips. Sienna's breath caught as he rose from his chair, still holding her hand, and moved around the table. He stopped in front of her, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. Sienna, he said, and there was a question in the way he spoke her name. She did not know what she was saying yes to, but the answer rose instinctively. Yes. Isaac cupped her face in his free hand, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone with infinite tenderness. Then slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he lowered his head and kissed her. It was nothing like the rough, demanding kisses she had dodged from Marcus. This was soft and questioning, a gentle pressure that made her feel cherished rather than claimed. Sienna's eyes fluttered closed as she kissed him back, her bandaged hands coming up to rest on his chest. When they finally broke apart, Isaac rested his forehead against hers, both of them breathing hard. I should not have done that, he murmured. You are under my protection. It is not right for me to take advantage. You are not taking advantage. Sienna's voice was shaky but certain. I wanted you to kiss me. I have wanted it for weeks. Sienna. Her name was a plea and a prayer. You do not know what you are saying. You have been through something terrible. You are grateful and vulnerable, and I should be stronger than this. I know my own mind. She pulled back enough to look him in the eyes. Yes, I am grateful. But that is not why I wanted you to kiss me. I wanted it because you are good and kind and brave. Because you make me feel safe in a way I have never felt before. Because when I look at you, my heart does things I cannot explain. She took a shaky breath. If you do not want me, if this was just a mistake, then say so. But do not tell me I do not know what I'm feeling. Isaac stared at her for a long moment, something like wonder dawning in his expression. You think I do not want you? His voice was rough with emotion. Sienna, I have thought about nothing but you for weeks. You are the last thing I see before I sleep, and the first thing I look for when I wake. I want you so badly it scares me. But I refuse to be another man who takes what he wants without thought for what you need. What I need, Sienna said, reaching up to cup his face the way he had cupped hers, is for you to kiss me again. A slow smile spread across Isaac's face, transforming him from severe to devastating. Yes, madam, he murmured, and then his lips were on hers again. This kiss was deeper, more confident, and Sienna melted into it. She wound her arms around his neck, pulling him closer, and felt his hands slide to her waist. They kissed until they were both dizzy and breathless, until the world narrowed to just the two of them and the warmth between their bodies. When they finally broke apart, Isaac was grinning like a boy, all his darkness temporarily banished. I am going to marry you, he said, the words tumbling out as if he could not hold them back. I know it is too soon, and I should court you properly, and I have nothing to offer but a wandering life. But Sienna Emerson, I am going to marry you if you will have me." Sienna's heart soared, even as her practical mind pointed out all the obstacles. They barely knew each other. She had no idea what kind of future they could build. But when she looked into Isaac's eyes, she saw her answer written there as clearly as if it were carved in stone. "Yes," she breathed. "Yes, I will marry you." Isaac let out a whoop of joy and lifted her off her feet, spinning her around the small cabin. Sienna laughed, giddy and disbelieving, clinging to his shoulders. When he set her down, he kissed her again, and again, and again, as if he could not quite believe she was real. "We are insane," Sienna said between kisses. "People will think we have lost our minds." "Let them think what they want." Isaac pulled her close, tucking her head under his chin. "I have been running from happiness for 8 years. I am done running. If this is insane, then I will be happily mad for the rest of my life." They stood wrapped in each other's arms for a long time, swaying slightly, listening to the wind rage outside while the fire crackled beside them. Sienna felt something in her chest unfurl and bloom, a fragile hope she had thought long dead. Maybe happiness was possible after all. Maybe she deserved it. "We should probably discuss practicalities," she said eventually, though she made no move to leave the circle of his arms. "Tomorrow." Isaac pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "Tonight I just want to hold you and know that you are mine and I am yours. The rest can wait until morning." "Tomorrow, then," Sienna agreed, and let herself sink into his warmth. They talked late into the night, standing by the fire and then eventually sitting together in Isaac's chair, Sienna on his lap with his arms wrapped around her. They talked about everything and nothing, their hopes and dreams and fears. They talked until the fire burned low, and exhaustion made their words slur. "I should let you sleep," Isaac said, but he made no move to release her. "Stay with me," Sienna said impulsively, "just to sleep. I do not want to be apart tonight." Isaac hesitated, clearly torn between propriety and desire. "Are you certain?" "I am certain." He carried her to the bed and laid her down gently, then stretched out beside her on top of the quilts. Sienna immediately burrowed against his chest, and his arms came around her instinctively. They lay like that, fully clothed and chaste, just holding each other as sleep slowly claimed them. It was the best rest Sienna had gotten in years. Morning brought clarity and the need to make plans. They sat together over breakfast, fingers intertwined on the rough table, discussing their future. "We should get married as soon as possible," Isaac said. "I will not have people thinking ill of you for staying here with me." "The nearest town with a preacher is probably 30 miles away," Sienna pointed out, "and the snow is too deep to travel safely." "Then we will wait until there is a break in the weather and go then. Might be a few weeks yet." Isaac squeezed her hand. "In the meantime, we should write to your mother. Let her know you are safe and what happened with Marcus." Sienna's stomach clenched at the thought. What if she does not believe me? Then that is her choice, but she deserves to know the truth. Isaac's voice was gentle but firm, and we should probably inform the law about what Marcus did. Man like that should not be free to hurt someone else. "Do you think he survived?" It was the question that had haunted Sienna for weeks. Isaac had sent Marcus walking into a blizzard with nothing but the clothes on his back. Part of her hoped he had made it to shelter, but another part, the part that still felt the rope burning through her wrists, hoped he had frozen in the snow. "I do not know," Isaac said honestly. If he was smart, he would have turned around as soon as he was out of sight and found the line shack or headed for his father's ranch. But if he was too angry or prideful, if he kept walking, he shrugged. "Either way, it is not on you. Whatever happened to him was the consequence of his own actions." Grr. Sienna nodded slowly. He was right, she knew that, but the guilt still gnawed at her. They spent the rest of the day in companionable domesticity. Isaac worked on repairing a broken trap while Sienna baked bread from their dwindling flour stores. They would need to make the journey to town soon regardless. not just for the preacher, but for supplies. The thought of leaving the safe cocoon of the cabin made Sienna anxious, but she knew it was necessary. That night, and every night after, Isaac slept beside her in the bed, always respectful, always careful not to push for more than she was ready to give. But the physical closeness deepened their emotional bond, and Sienna found herself falling more in love with him with each passing day. He was everything Marcus was not. Gentle where Marcus was rough, patient where Marcus was demanding, selfless where Marcus thought only of his own desires. Being with Isaac felt like coming home to a place she had not known she was searching for. The weather finally broke in mid-February, giving them a window to make the journey to the nearest settlement. They prepared carefully, packing supplies and bundling up against the cold. Isaac strapped his rifle across his back and made sure Sienna was wrapped in every warm layer they could spare. "Ready?" he asked, offering her his hand to help her mount the paint. "Ready," Sienna confirmed, though her heart hammered with nerves. The journey took most of the day following snow-packed trails through pine forests and across frozen streams. They saw no other travelers, just the occasional tracks of deer or elk. Sienna rode in front of Isaac, cradled against his chest, his arms bracketing her as he held the reins. The town, when they finally reached it, was barely more than a cluster of buildings around a central street, but it had a general store, a saloon, and a small church. Isaac headed straight for the church, where a weathered sign proclaimed services every Sunday. The preacher was a thin man in his 50s named Reverend Michaels, with kind eyes and work-worn hands. He listened to their story with increasing concern, his expression darkening when Isaac described finding Sienna being dragged through the snow. "That is a serious accusation," Reverend Michaels said when they finished. "Do you have proof?" Isaac's jaw tightened. "Her injuries were proof enough for me, but no, I did not stop to document everything before cutting her free." "I am not doubting you," the preacher said quickly, raising his hands. "But if you want to bring charges against this Marcus Thornton, you will need more than just your word. The law requires evidence." "The rope burns on my wrists," Sienna said quietly. "Would those count as evidence?" "They might, though he could claim it was an accident." Reverend Michaels sighed. "I will write to the territorial marshal and inform him of the situation, but in the meantime, the best thing you can do is get married and make sure Miss Emerson is under legal protection. A husband's word carries more weight than a stranger's." It was a cynical view of the law, but Sienna knew he was right. As an unmarried woman, her testimony was worth less than Marcus's simply by virtue of her gender. But as Isaac's wife, she would at least have someone with the legal standing to defend her. "Can you marry us today?" Isaac asked. Reverend Michaels glanced between them, clearly noting their rough appearance and the urgency in Isaac's voice. "I should probably ask if you are both entering this union of your own free will." "I am," Sienna said firmly. "And I am," Isaac added. "Then I see no reason to delay." The preacher rose from his desk. "Let me get my wife to serve as witness, and we will perform the ceremony right now." It was perhaps the simplest wedding in history. They stood in the small church with its rough-hewn pews and simple cross, Reverend Michaels reading from his worn Bible while his wife looked on with a smile. Isaac held both of Sienna's hands in his grip steady and sure as he spoke his vows. "I, Isaac Young, take you, Sienna Emerson, to be my lawfully wedded wife. I promise to love you, protect you, and stand by you for all the days of my life." Sienna's voice shook slightly but did not waver as she repeated the words back to him. "I, Sienna Emerson, take you, Isaac Young, to be my lawfully wedded husband. I promise to love you, stand by you, and be your partner for all the days of my life." They had no rings to exchange, but Reverend Michaels declared them husband and wife all the same. "You may kiss your bride," he said with a smile. Isaac cupped Sienna's face in his hands and kissed her softly, reverently, sealing their union. When they pulled apart, his eyes were suspiciously bright. "Hello, Mrs. Young," he murmured. "Hello, Mr. Young," Sienna replied, her heart so full she thought it might burst. They signed the marriage certificate with the preacher and his wife as witnesses, making it official in the eyes of both God and the law. Isaac paid the preacher with some of his carefully saved money. Then they headed to the general store to purchase supplies. The storekeeper, a portly man with shrewd eyes, looked them over with interest. "You folks new to the area?" "Passing through," Isaac said shortly. "Need flour, coffee, salt, and ammunition." While the storekeeper gathered their supplies, Sienna wandered the small shop, marveling at goods she had not seen in months. Her eyes fell on a display of ribbons, and she touched one longingly, a deep blue that matched Isaac's eyes. "See something you like?" Isaac appeared at her elbow. "Just looking." Sienna started to pull her hand back, but Isaac caught it. "How much for this ribbon?" he called to the storekeeper. "2 bits." Isaac dug in his pocket and produced the coins, then handed the ribbon to Sienna with a slightly embarrassed smile. "Wedding present. I know it is not much." "It is perfect." Sienna stood on tiptoe to kiss his cheek. "Thank you." They finished their shopping and loaded the supplies onto the pack horse, along with a few extra treats Isaac insisted on buying despite Sienna's protests. Then, just as they were about to leave, a man on horseback rode into town at a gallop. Sienna froze. She recognized that horse, recognized the rider despite the heavy coat obscuring his features. Marcus. He pulled his mount to a stop in front of the general store, swinging down stiffly from the saddle. His face was haggard, marked by obvious frostbite, and he moved like every joint ached, but he was alive. His eyes widened when he spotted Sienna, then narrowed with rage when he saw Isaac standing protectively beside her. "You!" he snarled, his hand dropping to his gun. "I would not do that." Isaac's voice was cold as winter steel. His own hand rested casually on his holstered revolver, but Sienna could see the tension coiled in his shoulders. "We are in town now, surrounded by witnesses. You draw on me and it will be murder." Marcus's hand hesitated, clearly weighing his options. A few townspeople had noticed the confrontation and were gathering, watching with interest. "That woman is property of my family," Marcus spat. "You had no right to take her." "That woman is my wife," Isaac countered. "Legally married not 1 hour ago. She is under my protection now, and if you so much as look at her wrong, I will make you regret surviving that walk." Marcus's face flushed dark red. "Your wife? You cannot, she is—" He struggled for words, clearly thrown by this development. "She is my wife," Isaac repeated, enunciating each word, "which means any harm that comes to her, any threat against her, is an assault on me as well. The law sees it that way, so does my gun." For a long moment, nobody moved. The gathered townspeople watched in breathless silence, waiting to see if violence would erupt. Sienna's heart pounded so hard she thought everyone must be able to hear it. Then Reverend Michaels pushed through the crowd, his presence immediately commanding attention. "Is there a problem here, gentlemen?" "No problem, Reverend," Isaac said, not taking his eyes off Marcus. "Just making sure everyone understands the situation." "I understand perfectly." Marcus's voice dripped venom. "I will be having words with the territorial marshal about this. My father will not let this stand. Your father is welcome to try." Isaac's smile was sharp and dangerous. "But kidnapping and attempted murder are serious crimes. The marshal might be more interested in hearing about what you did to Sienna than in your father's complaints about her marriage." Marcus blanched slightly, clearly not having expected Isaac to turn the situation back on him. He looked around at the watching crowd, at Reverend Michaels, who was regarding him with clear disapproval, and seemed to realize he had lost this battle. "This is not over," he said, but there was no conviction behind the threat. He mounted his horse with visible difficulty and rode off without looking back. Sienna let out a breath she had not realized she was holding. Her knees felt weak, and she swayed slightly. Isaac immediately put an arm around her waist, steadying her. "You all right?" he murmured. "I am now." She leaned into his strength, watching Marcus's retreating figure. Do you think he will really go to the marshal? Probably, but he has no case. You are of age, married me of your own free will, and even if he tries to press charges about me taking you from the ranch, we have the rope burns and your testimony about what he did. Isaac's arm tightened around her. He cannot hurt you anymore, Sienna. I promise. Reverend Michaels approached them, his expression concerned. That was Marcus Thornton, the man who assaulted you? Yes, Sienna confirmed. The preacher's face hardened. I will be writing that letter to the marshal tonight with a full account of your testimony. That boy should answer for his crimes. He paused, then added more gently, You folks should probably head back to your cabin and stay out of sight for a while. Let things settle down. That was our plan, Isaac said. Yamaw, thank you, Reverend, for everything. They left town as quickly as they could, both eager to put distance between themselves and any potential confrontation. Only when they were miles away, surrounded by silent forest, did Sienna finally allow herself to relax. We are really married, she said wonderingly, as much to herself as to Isaac. We really are, Mrs. Young. Isaac pressed a kiss to her temple. How does it feel? Right, Sienna said simply. It feels right. They rode back to the cabin in comfortable silence, arriving just as the sun was setting. Isaac tended the horses while Sienna got the fire going and started preparing dinner from their fresh supplies. There was something profoundly satisfying about these simple domestic tasks, about working in harmony to create a home together. When Isaac came back inside stamping snow from his boots, Sienna was stirring a pot of beans on the stove. He came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist, resting his chin on her shoulder. Smells good, he murmured. It is just beans. I was not talking about the beans. Sienna laughed and turned in his arms to swat playfully at his chest. Flatterer. Just honest. Isaac caught her hand and brought it to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. The gesture was so tender it made Sienna's heart ache. I love you, Sienna. I know I have not said it before, but I do. I love you more than I thought it was possible to love another person. I love you too, Sienna whispered, the words feeling both enormous and inadequate to describe what she felt. I think I started falling in love with you the moment you cut that rope. They kissed then, slow and deep, pouring all their emotions into the connection. When they finally broke apart, dinner was burning and they had to scramble to save the beans, laughing at their distraction. That night, for the first time, they came together as husband and wife in truth. Isaac was gentle and patient, making sure Sienna felt cherished and safe. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the narrow bed, skin to skin, listening to the wind howl outside. I want to build you a house, Isaac said into the darkness. A real house, not just a trapper's cabin, somewhere we can raise a family. Where would we build it? Wherever you want. If you want to go back to Boise, we can find land near there. If you want to stay in Montana, we will find a valley somewhere and homestead. Your choice. Sienna thought about it, imagining different futures. Boise held memories of her father and the life before everything changed. But it also held painful reminders of loss and the desperate choices that followed. Montana was where she had nearly died, but it was also where she had found Isaac, where she had discovered what real love felt like. I want to go where you are, she said finally. That is home to me now, wherever you are. Isaac's arms tightened around her. Then we will find our place together. When spring comes, we will scout for good land, somewhere with water and timber and room to grow. We will build something that is ours. Tell me about it, Sienna said, snuggling closer, and tell me about our house. And Isaac did, spinning dreams into words as they lay together in the firelight. He described a cabin with a real floor and glass windows, a kitchen big enough for Sienna to work in comfort, a bedroom with space for a proper bed. He talked about building a barn for horses and milk cows, fencing pasture for cattle, planting a garden in the spring. Sienna added her own details, describing curtains she would sew for the windows and shelves for books once they could afford them. She talked about teaching reading and writing to any children in the area who needed it, maybe even starting a small school. She painted a picture of Sunday dinners and summer evenings on a porch they had not built yet. They talked until they were both drowsy with contentment, their words trailing off into comfortable silence. Sienna drifted to sleep feeling safer and happier than she could ever remember being, cradled in the arms of the man she loved. The weeks that followed were perhaps the sweetest of Sienna's life. She and Isaac fell into a rhythm as a married couple, working together during the day and curling up together at night. The deep winter slowly gave way to early signs of spring, the days growing imperceptibly longer, the snow beginning to melt in sunny patches. They heard nothing more from Marcus or his father, which Sienna hoped meant they had decided to cut their losses. Reverend Michaels sent word via a passing trapper that he had written to the territorial marshal as promised, but there had been no response yet. The wheels of justice turned slowly, especially in winter. Isaac continued checking his trap lines, and Sienna went with him now that she was fully healed. He taught her to read the forest, to spot the signs of animals and predict where they would go. She proved to have a natural talent for it, moving quietly through the woods and asking insightful questions. "You would have made a good scout," Isaac told her one afternoon as they reset a snare together. "Maybe I still can," Sienna replied with a grin. "Who says only men can scout?" Isaac laughed, the sound still rare enough to make Sienna's heart flutter. "You are right, who says? If you want to learn, I will teach you everything I know." And he did. Throughout February and into March, Isaac shared his knowledge freely. He taught Sienna how to shoot his rifle, to field dress game, to tan hides properly. She learned which plants were safe to eat and which could be used for medicine. She learned to predict weather by reading the sky and the behavior of animals. In turn, Sienna taught Isaac things he had never bothered to learn, living alone as he had. She showed him how to mend clothes properly so they would last longer, how to cook more than just basic trail food, how to organize supplies efficiently. They became partners in the truest sense, each contributing their strengths to their shared life. As the snow melted, they began making plans for their future in earnest. They would stay in the cabin until the last of Isaac's furs were sold, which would give them capital to start their homestead. Then they would travel south to find land, somewhere with good water and enough timber for building, but also open spaces for crops and grazing. "I was thinking we might try near Bozeman," Isaac said one evening as they studied the rough map he kept among his supplies. "Good land there, I've heard. Growing settlement, but not too crowded yet." "That sounds perfect," Sienna agreed. She traced the route with her finger. "How long would it take to get there?" 3, maybe 4 weeks, depending on weather and how heavily we're loaded. We would want to take our time, make sure we are not pushing the horses too hard." They spent hours planning, discussing every detail of the journey and what they would need. It kept them busy through the last weeks of winter, gave them something to look forward to, but underneath the practical discussions was a deeper current of hope and excitement. They were building a life together, creating something new from the wreckage of their old lives. In late March, just as the first wildflowers were starting to poke through the melting snow, a rider appeared at their cabin. Sienna saw him coming from a distance and immediately felt a spike of fear, but Isaac squeezed her hand reassuringly. "It is all right, that is Marshal Weston. I recognize his horse." The marshal was a grizzled man in his 50s with steel gray hair and a no-nonsense demeanor. He accepted Isaac's offer of coffee and sat at their small table, his sharp eyes taking in everything about the cabin and its occupants. "I received a letter from Reverend Michaels," he said without preamble, "about an incident involving Marcus Thornton and Mrs. Young here." "Yes, sir," Isaac confirmed. "I witnessed Marcus dragging Sienna behind his horse through the snow. I intervened and she has been with me since." "And you subsequently married?" "We did." Marshal Weston turned to Sienna. "Is this all true, Mrs. Young? Your stepbrother assaulted you and Mr. Young came to your aid?" "Yes, sir." Sienna met his gaze steadily. "Marcus had been making unwanted advances for months. When I threatened to tell his father, he tied me to his horse and dragged me. If Isaac had not cut the rope, I would have died." You have proof of these advances? Only my word. But I have scars from the rope on my wrists if you need to see them. The marshal considered this, then nodded. I spoke with James Thornton before coming here. He claims his son says you stole from them and ran away, that Marcus was only trying to bring you back home for discipline. That is a lie, Sienna said flatly. I stole nothing. Marcus tried to kill me. I believe you, Marshal Weston said, surprising them both. James Thornton strikes me as a man who does not want to see what is right in front of him. His son has a reputation in town for troubling women. This is not the first complaint I have heard, just the first one serious enough to warrant investigation. Relief flooded through Sienna. So you will arrest him? I already did. He is in jail in town awaiting trial for assault with intent to commit bodily harm. With Reverend Michael's testimony and yours, along with Mr. Young's eyewitness account, I expect he will be convicted and sentenced to several years in the territorial prison. Sienna felt her knees go weak. It was over. Marcus would face consequences for what he had done. She would not have to live in fear that he might come after her again. Thank you, Marshal, Isaac said, his arm coming around Sienna's waist to steady her. We appreciate you taking this seriously. Just doing my job. Marshal Weston stood and drained the last of his coffee. You will both need to come to town to testify at the trial. It should be within the next month or so. I will send word when a date is set. We will be there, Isaac promised. After the marshal left, they held each other for a long time, letting the reality sink in. Justice would be served. They could move forward without constantly looking over their shoulders. It is really over, Sienna whispered. It is really over, Isaac confirmed. Now we can focus on our future. The trial, when it came in mid-April, was brief and decisive. Sienna testified about Marcus's behavior and the assault, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands. Isaac corroborated her account, describing in clinical detail what he had witnessed. Reverend Michael spoke about the condition Sienna had been in when they came to his church. Marcus's defense was weak, consisting mostly of claims that Sienna had misunderstood his intentions and that the dragging incident had been an accident caused by his horse spooking. The jury deliberated for less than an hour before finding him guilty on all counts. The judge sentenced Marcus to 5 years hard labor at the territorial prison. As the guards led him away, he shot one last hateful look at Sienna, but there was no power in it anymore. He was a defeated man, and they both knew it. Outside the courthouse, Isaac pulled Sienna into his arms. How are you feeling? Like I can finally breathe, Sienna admitted. Like the world is full of possibilities again. Then let's go chase some of those possibilities. Isaac kissed her forehead. Let's go find our home. They left Montana a week later with the last of the snow melting from the high passes. Their possessions were packed on 2 horses and a mule Isaac had purchased with his fur money. It was everything they owned in the world, but it felt like a fortune. The journey south was long but pleasant. The country coming alive with spring, they traveled at a leisurely pace, enjoying the freedom of the road and each other's company. At night they made camp under the stars, and Isaac would hold Sienna close while they watched the fire burn low. They reached the area around Bozeman in early May, when the valley was a carpet of wildflowers and the mountains still wore their caps of snow. Isaac had been right about the land. It was beautiful, with plenty of water from mountain streams and a mix of forest and grassland perfect for a homestead. They spent 2 weeks exploring before they found it. A small valley with a creek running through it, sheltered by pines on 3 sides and open to the south for sun. There was a natural meadow perfect for planting and plenty of timber for building. This is it, Sienna breathed, standing in the middle of the meadow and turning in a slow circle. This is home. Isaac came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist, resting his chin on her shoulder. You are sure? I have never been more sure of anything. They filed a homestead claim the next day in town, making it legal. Then they began the long process of building their home. Isaac cut trees and hauled logs while Sienna cleared the building site and prepared the ground for a garden. They worked from dawn to dusk, exhausting themselves with honest labor. Neighbors from surrounding homesteads came to help with the barn raising, and Sienna met the women who would become her friends. They were a practical, hard-working lot who welcomed her warmly once they heard the story of how she and Isaac met. "He rode in like a knight and saved you from a dragon," said Mrs. Patterson, a cheerful woman with 6 children who lived 3 miles east. "That is true romance." "He did," Sienna agreed, smiling as she watched Isaac working with the other men. "He saved me in every way that matters." By midsummer, they had a house. It was not large or fancy, just 2 rooms with a loft for future children, but it was solid and well built. Isaac had made sure the windows faced south for light and warmth, and he had built Sienna a kitchen with enough counter space for baking. On the day they moved in officially, Isaac carried Sienna over the threshold despite her laughing protests. "It is tradition," he insisted. "We already did that at the cabin. Then we will start a tradition of doing it at every new home." He set her down in the middle of their new front room and kissed her soundly. "Welcome home, Mrs. Young." "Welcome home, Mr. Young," Sienna replied, and felt the truth of it settle into her bones. This was home. Not just the house, but Isaac. This life they were building together, the future stretching out before them, full of promise. That first year was hard work, but deeply satisfying. They planted crops, built fences, bought a milk cow and some chickens. Sienna started a small garden that flourished under her care. Isaac hired on with a local rancher for some extra income while their own homestead got established. In the fall, Sienna realized she was pregnant. She told Isaac one evening after dinner, simply taking his hand and placing it on her still flat belly. "We are going to have a baby," she said, watching his face. Isaac's expression went through a dozen emotions in as many seconds: shock, joy, fear, wonder. Finally, he dropped to his knees in front of her and pressed his forehead to her stomach. "A baby," he whispered. "We are going to have a baby." "Are you happy?" Sienna asked, running her fingers through his hair. "Happy does not begin to cover it." Isaac looked up at her with tears in his eyes. "I am terrified and thrilled and grateful and about 100 other things all at once, but yes, above all, I am happy." Their son was born the following spring, during a late April snowstorm that reminded them both of the storm that had brought them together. He came into the world squalling lustily with a shock of dark hair and his father's blue eyes. "What should we name him?" Sienna asked, exhausted but glowing as she held the baby. Isaac, who had barely left her side throughout the long labor, stroked one finger down their son's tiny cheek with infinite gentleness. "I was thinking maybe James, after your father, if that would make you happy." Tears sprang to Sienna's eyes. "Really?" "Really. He was a good man who raised a remarkable daughter. I would be honored to name our son after him." "James Young," Sienna said, trying it out. "I love it." Little James was followed 2 years later by a daughter they named Rose, and 2 years after that by another son they called Thomas. Their house rang with laughter and chaos, and Isaac proved to be a devoted father who spent every spare moment with his children. On quiet evenings after the children were in bed, Isaac and Sienna would sit on the porch they had finally built, watching the sun set over the mountains. They would hold hands and talk about their day, about the children and the crops and their neighbors. They would make plans for the future and remember the past. "Do you ever think about that day?" Sienna asked one such evening, several years into their marriage. "The day you found me in the snow?" "Every single day," Isaac replied quietly. "It was the worst and best day of my life. Worst because of what was happening to you, best because it brought you into my life. I think about it too, about how different things would be if you had not been there." She shuddered. "I probably would not be here at all." Isaac pulled her closer against his side. "But I was there, and you are here, and we have this." He gestured at the homestead spread out before them, the fields and barn and the sound of their children breathing softly through the open window. "We have everything that matters." "We do," Sienna agreed. "We really do." Years passed, seasons turned, and their children grew. James became a tall, serious boy who loved working with his father. Rose was bright and curious, always asking questions and helping her mother in the garden. Thomas was the wild one, constantly exploring and getting into mischief. Sienna eventually realized her dream of teaching, starting a small school in their barn for the children of surrounding homesteads. She had 8 students that first year, including her own children, and the number grew steadily. Isaac built proper desks and a chalkboard, and the community donated books. Isaac continued to work hard on their expanding homestead, but he also found time to scout for the army again during the summers, earning good money that helped them build a more secure future. He always came home to Sienna and the children, though, never gone for more than a few weeks at a time. One evening, when they were both in their 40s and their children were nearly grown, Isaac pulled an old rope from a box in the barn. It was the rope he had cut from Marcus's saddle all those years ago, the rope that had bound Sienna's wrists. He had kept it as a reminder. "I was thinking we should burn this," he said, showing it to Sienna. "We do not need reminders of dark times anymore." Sienna looked at the rope, at the frayed end where Isaac's knife had cut through it. So much pain was tied up in that length of hemp, but also so much growth. It represented the worst moment of her life, but also the beginning of her best life. "Yes," she said, "let's burn it." They built a fire in the yard that night, and their children gathered to watch, curious about the ceremony. Isaac held the rope for a moment, then handed it to Sienna. "You should do it," he said. "It is your past to release." Sienna took the rope and felt its weight one last time. Then she tossed it into the fire and watched the flames consume it, turning pain into ash. Isaac's arm came around her shoulders, and their children pressed close, and Sienna felt the last shadow of that terrible day finally lift. "It is done," she said quietly. "It is done," Isaac agreed. "Now there is only the future." And what a future it was. James, their oldest, eventually took over running the homestead, proving to be as capable and hard-working as his father. Rose married a neighboring rancher's son and started her own family close by. Thomas, true to his wandering spirit, became a scout like his father, but always came home for holidays and major events. Isaac and Sienna grew old together on the land they had built from nothing. They watched grandchildren grow up in the same house where their own children had been raised. They celebrated anniversaries and mourned losses and laughed at the same stories told 100 times. On their 30th wedding anniversary, their children threw them a party with half the county in attendance. There were speeches and toasts and a fiddle player who got everyone dancing. Isaac, despite his graying hair and the lines on his face, swept Sienna into his arms for a waltz, just like a young man courting his sweetheart. "Still got some life in me yet," he said with a grin. "I should hope so," Sienna replied. "I'm planning on keeping you around for a good while longer." "Good, because I am not going anywhere without you." They danced until they were breathless and laughing, surrounded by the family and community they had built. When the song ended, Isaac pulled Sienna close and kissed her, and their children cheered. Later, when the party was winding down and they had a moment alone, Isaac took Sienna's hand and led her out to the porch. The sun was setting, painting the mountains in shades of gold and pink. "Look at what we made," Isaac said softly, gesturing at the homestead, the gathered family and friends, the life they had created. "All of this started with one moment, one choice to act when I saw someone who needed help." "The best choice you ever made," Sienna said, leaning into his warmth. "The best choice we both made. You could have run from me, could have been too afraid to trust again, but you were brave enough to take a chance on a stranger in the wilderness." "You were never a stranger." Sienna turned to look up at him. "From the moment you cut that rope, you were my future. I think my heart knew it even before my head caught up." Isaac cupped her face in his weathered hands, the same hands that had held her through joy and sorrow, through the birth of their children and the building of their dreams. "I love you, Sienna Young. I have loved you for 30 years, and I will love you for 30 more if the Lord sees fit to give them to us. I love you too, Sienna whispered, for all the years we have left, and into whatever comes after. They stood on the porch as the sun set and the stars began to appear, holding each other close. Behind them, their children's laughter drifted through the windows. Around them, the land they had built together stretched out in peaceful prosperity, and above them, the wide Montana sky held all the promise of tomorrow. It had started with rope and snow and violence, with fear and pain and desperate need, but it had become this: love and family, home and belonging, a life richer than either of them could have imagined. Isaac had cut a rope and faced down evil, and in doing so had found his salvation. Sienna had survived her darkest moment and found not just rescue, but partnership, not just safety, but passion. They had built something beautiful from the ashes of their old lives, something that would outlast them both and the children and grandchildren who bore their legacy. They had turned a moment of crisis into a lifetime of love, and in the end, that was all that mattered. They had found each other in the wilderness, two lost souls who became one, and they had made a home together that would stand long after they were gone. The rope had been cut, the evil had been faced down, and love had won. Their story was complete, a circle closed, a promise fulfilled. And as they stood together watching the stars come out over the land they loved, Isaac and Sienna Young knew they had been blessed beyond measure. They had survived, they had thrived, and they had loved with everything they had. It was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything.